Okay, this is our last video on cooperation, and we're going to take a look at the mechanisms leading to cooperative behavior in animals. We've looked at two of the mechanisms already. So we've looked at how byproduct mutualism and reciprocity or reciprocal altruism can lead to cooperation in animals. And now we're going to take a look at two others, just briefly here actually, group selection and kin selection. So group selection says something like this: cooperation is going to evolve for the good of the group. Here's the idea. If there's a predator in the area and I call out, make an alarm call, oh, there's a predator, I might not benefit because I might get killed by the predator. The predator's like, oh, there's some ding-dong calling out. But the rest of the group is going to benefit. They're going to take cover, they're going to hide, they're going to be more likely to survive and thrive, and that's for the good of the group. Does this ever happen? Does natural selection act on group characteristics like this so that you can get the for the good of the group happening? This research is very controversial, but the idea goes something like this. Natural selection can act on whole groups of organisms if it's acting so that this group is favored. This group is doing better than that group. So if you all cooperate and as cooperators, you do better than the group over here that's all being selfish, then this cooperative behavior, because it helps your group survive relative to this group over here, is going to maybe be selected for over time, and eventually cooperation, because it's for the good of the group, could evolve. There's a lot of controversy about this and a lot of research on group selection. And I'm not going to actually go into the details on this one. You guys can take a look at it if it's something that interests you. And it could be part of your cooperative project that you do. You could decide to look at cooperation and group selection if that's something that really interests you. Okay, so that's one other mechanism that could lead to cooperation. If it benefits the group, could this behavior be selected for over time? Possibly. I'll leave it at that. And then there's plain old altruism, or we could call it cooperation due to kin selection. So here's the idea. In altruistic behavior, the donor, the helper, loses reproductive effort as a result of helping another individual to survive and produce offspring. Let's think of a simple human example. So you're out at Lake Michigan and the waves are really rough, and you see someone struggling in the waves, someone that might not even survive if that person doesn't get help. So what do? You swim out and you help that person to get back to shore successfully. You're doing a behavior that's altruistic, right? You are going out and risking your life to save the life of another individual so that individual can survive and thrive and reproduce later. The donor here is the donor, you, the helper, is actually risking your life to do that. Why would this evolve? How could this evolve? Does it ever happen? Well, yes, it definitely happens. It happens. But why could it evolve? Researchers suggested that this could evolve, altruistic behaviors could evolve because of kin selection. And our next lecture is all about kin selection. So we're going to learn more about that later, but this is the idea. Altruism might contribute to an animal's fitness if an animal shows altruistic behavior to closely related individuals. So what if the individual out in Lake Michigan is your nephew? Are you more likely to try to help than if it's a stranger? Kin selection would say yes. Kin selection would say altruism is adaptive. Cooperation like this is adaptive and will be selected for when the direct fitness cost to the helper is less than the indirect fitness benefit. if I help my relatives to survive and thrive, then my genes are going to be passed along through my relatives. And so I might be cooperating because I'm in some ways benefiting indirectly through my relatives. My relatives are surviving, they're thriving because I made this alarm call or because I went out into the rough Lake Michigan and rescued my nephew. This is called kin selection. We'll talk all about it later, but it's one mechanism by which cooperation could evolve, by which seemingly altruistic behavior could evolve. Let's give you an example. And this is a simple example, and you'll see more about kin selection in the next lecture and in your Simutext assignment. But let's talk about scrub jays. Scrub jays look a little bit like blue jays. They live in Florida, and here's what their reproductive life looks like. It turns out that male and female build a nest and raise young at that nest, and they have a territory in which they do this. And the 2 to 3 year old males and females, the 2 to 3 year olds are actually don't breed. They don't go out after when they're 2. They're reproductively able to breed, but they don't go out and breed. They typically stay at their parents' nest and help rear nestlings and fledglings. Fledglings would be little birds that have fledged the nest, that have left the nest, but are still needing help getting food, etc. So what happens is for most Florida scrub jays is you've got parents and you've got young and you've got older siblings that are in the territory helping to raise these young. All right? Why do they do this? Why do reproductively mature animals, why do they forego reproduction themselves to help their parents at the nest, to help their parents raise offspring? That's the question, right? And kin selection would suggest that they actually benefit indirectly by helping raise siblings. They are gaining reproductive success. Some of the same genes are in those siblings as in themselves, and maybe gaining reproductive success that they wouldn't get if they weren't helping. So we need to know a couple of things. Do the helpers increase offspring survival rates? Do the helpers benefit more than they lose by missing out on the opportunity to breed themselves? If they're helping, they can't breed themselves. They can't go about their own reproduction. So researchers have really looked at this with respect to scrub jays. And here's just one graph that shows the predation rate on nests with eggs or nestlings during the breeding season when helpers are present. So that would be when there are these older siblings who are not breeding themselves but are helping, versus when helpers are absent. And the predation rate is significantly higher, especially in June, if you take a look, for nests with no helpers than nests with helpers. So it pays off. It benefits the parents, certainly, to have these helpers around. The next step would be to ask the question, what about the helpers? What happens if they don't help? Are they successful in finding territories and in breeding themselves? Well, it turns out scrub jays, at least, aren't very successful at 2 or 3 years of age at finding their own territory. Territories are very limited. Habitat is limited. And if you can't find a territory, you can't breed. And so it may benefit scrub jays to stay at home and help with their siblings, help raise their siblings, help them avoid predation, succeed, and then when they're a little bit older, find their own territory, successfully breed on their own. And so that's why we think the evolution of cooperative behavior in cooperative breeding occurred, or cooperative behavior in breeding occurred. Okay, more on kin selection in the next lecture, but just recognize that that's a mechanism by which cooperation could evolve. Alrighty.